Hey there, welcome to this episode of Speaking of. Today I'm kind of doing a hybrid thing here between Speaking of and the cutting room floor. The cutting room floor is a segment where I look at something from a recent text and we kind of go a little bit deeper into into a detail of a passage from a message here at Sunday Slope. And Speaking of is sort of more of a commentary on a social issue through a Christian lens. And today I'm kind of bringing those together because recently here at Sunny Slope, we looked at the question of family. We looked at the instructions to parents and to children and how Christian families should live. And as in the process of sort of digging into all of that and studying the role of the family and that, I came across some data that I found really quite fascinating. But before I get into that, I want to sort of maybe raise the question of the social issues that are facing our culture today. When most of us look around and we can actually see all kinds of problems in our world. We see things from, crime rates, we see poverty that it seems to be on the rise, addictions, we see all of these social issues. And of course, everybody wants to know, well, what is behind this? What is the cause of the many social issues that our culture is facing today? And of course, there's all kinds of reasons for it. It's, some depending on what side of the political aisle you're on, you'll hear different things from, you'll hear whether it's racism, whether it's economic injustice, whether it's poverty, whether it's, the erosion of the traditional family. All kinds of people have different suggestions. The data indeed supports the idea that the breakdown of the traditional family has a lot to do with many of these social issues and many of these social causes. Now, it's interesting. I was listening to a commentator on this, an author who's just written a book on this, and she had some fascinating insight into this. What struck me, though, was that she had trouble acknowledging the religious aspect of this. And I maybe it's not so much she had trouble, but she didn't really dig into that. And the reason I find that intriguing is because the church for a long time has been pointing to this, and people who are on the more conservative side of the spectrum have been pointing to this as a problem. And it seems that the data is now bearing that out. So here's just a little bit of what's happening in our society today. Here's just a little bit of the background, just purely by the stats. First of all, 1 in 4 kids today, 25%, that's 17.8 million children, will be raised without a father in the home. And when there's not a father in the home, children without a father are 4 times more likely to live in poverty than children who are in a home where there's 2 parents. So 4 times more likely. When you look at the total number of children who are in poverty, 12% were from married couple families and 44% were in mother-only families. So you can see the huge increase in the number of children who are in poverty between those who are in a single parent home versus those who are in a married family home. 12% of children in poverty are in married couple compared to 44% in mother-only families. The data is strong in suggesting that children raised in a family where there's no father figure are much more likely to abuse drugs and alcohol. They're much more likely to have mental health issues. They're much more likely to drop out of school and to not get an education or to not complete their education. And that's going to factor into something that I'm going to say in just a couple of minutes. But that's a huge one. So if you were to take the average high school class, and if you were to look at the total number of people who drop out, so now we're looking at not just the graduating class, but we're looking at the number of dropouts from that class, you would find that about 70%, a little more than 70% of all those dropouts came from single parent homes. Single children in single parent homes are far more likely to become if they're a teenager, they're likely to become pregnant or they're likely to impregnate somebody else, which only perpetuates the cycle. So all these negative incomes, and there are more of them as well, all these negative incomes actually can be traced to or there can be you can trace a correlation to the fact that there is to single parent homes, to homes that have lost the father figure. It's more often the father that's not in the home than the mother, but I think I think the data you'd suggest some similarities. In other words, if there's a father in the home but not a mother, the outcomes would also be negative. I'm not sure though what the difference would be between an absent father and an absent mother. Now, what is the cause? How did we get to this point where you're seeing fewer and fewer fathers in the picture, where you're seeing an increase in single parent homes? How did we get to that point? And there's, I think, a variety of answers. There's some evidence to suggest that the rise in single parent homes is sort of correlates to the rise in poverty. So starting in about the early 1960s, Johnson's Great Society actually provided so much economic relief that it became profitable, or at least it became you could actually gain more money the more children that you had, even if they were born out of wedlock. Now, there's some data to suggest that there's other data that actually suggests a different picture. But here's what is here's what is worth noting. First of all, single parent homes, there is a race factor to it, and that what that means is that African American communities, African American families are far more likely to deal with and to have absentee fathers. That's just a statistics, and it's really a sad one, but it's something like 56% of children in African American homes will be from single parent homes compared to 22% of white families. The number for Hispanics is around 30%. The number for Asian families is actually far lower than even white families. So there's a race component to it. African Americans are affected by far the most. What is all this driven by? Well, there's a couple things that are worth noting. First of all, it is not driven by divorce. In other words, what we're seeing here, I mean, this does happen, but it's not anywhere close to being the main factor, and that is that the rise in absentee in single parent families is not because couples are getting divorced. It's because couples are just never getting married. And so then one or the other, and again, as I said before, it's usually the husband leaving the wife, leaving the mother and to raise the children by herself. So it's not the breakdown of marriage, or it's not the severing of marriages. It's actually just fewer people are getting married, and therefore it's easier for a person to leave the relationship behind. It is not the rise in single parent homes is not due to teen parenting. In other words, we're not seeing this because more and more teens are getting pregnant. That's actually not the case. There's fewer and fewer teen pregnancies. Teen pregnancy has dropped off dramatically. What we're really seeing is adults who are having children together, but they're not staying together. The one or the other is leaving. It's not due to cohabitation. Some people say, well, couples are living together more and more. That's actually not the case. Or at least it's not a cause in all of this. One of the main one of the other things that it's not really tied to is abuse. And what I mean by that is that, I mean, it does happen, but it's not a major factor, and that's that the husband or the father is abusive towards the mother, and therefore the mother decides to leave with her children, and then she's a single mom. That does happen, but it's a comparatively small number of the total of single parent homes. The number one driver in all of this, the number one reason, at least that's what the data suggests, is education. So if you compare the education levels of all the people, families, you'll find that the more educated families, the more educated people are the ones who tend to be married, and they tend to stay together. And the lower educated a person is, the more likely they are to not remain together as a couple or as a family. And so the relationships break down. There's other factors that are part of that. In incarceration, people who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated tend not to be good marriage partners. At least that's the perception. And so may father children, but then they don't end up getting married because the mother of the children doesn't want to be married. Those kinds of things. There's other complicating factors as well, but the number one factor that drives single parent homes is a lack of education or lower education. And so the more education that a person gets, at least statistically, the more likely they are to be married and to stay together. What is the cause of, or what is the cost of all of this? I think it's worth maybe describing the cost that this places on society. It's in some ways it's hard to measure this. So I sort of put these numbers out here kind of loosely. I got these numbers from, I think it was the National Institute of Fatherhood, but I saw them referenced in a couple of places. But at least one estimate put the cost around $100 billion, not, or just shy of $100 billion. And that's what that is that's estimating the cost of programs like temporary assistance for needy families, WIC, SNAP. These are social service programs here in the United States. And obviously, if in single parent homes, and then when children grow up in single parent homes, that only raises the, poverty correlates to that. And so you get families that are impoverished and they stay in poverty. They need more assistance, and then the cycle just kind of repeats, and then they end up getting in trouble, drugs, addiction, alcohol, imprisonment, and so on. And the cost of that is astronomical. And it's taxpayer funded, of course. And so, this is not us. This is, there's an economic cost, there's a social cost, and all sorts of things. So, obviously you can see hopefully that the breakdown of the family and the sort of the dissolution of traditional family has all kinds of negative outcomes. And there's variety of reasons behind that. What do we do about it? I want to suggest just a few things. This is these are obviously, this is a huge oversimplification because these are, big policy changes and things, but I think there's a few things we can do. Number one, obviously strengthen the education system. And what that might mean is that you provide greater emphasis on trade schools, and you make it easier for people to go back to school and to get a good education or to learn a trade so that they can then provide for their families and provide a stable family. That would probably go a long way towards addressing some of this. You also, I think, maybe related to that is sort of the welfare to work idea, which is provide welfare and provide social assistance and social service, but make sure that there's a mechanism that's built into that encourages productivity, that encourages the opportunity to move towards productive employment, so that you don't just simply get a handout, but that you're actually working towards productive employment. I think there should be a way, and again, this is kind of where it's like, well, this is a nice idea, but how do you do it? And I'm not sure of the how do you do it, but I think holding especially fathers responsible and accountable for their paternity. In other words, a lot of times what happens is you have a mother and father and they have a kid together, and the burden falls on the mother. And my understanding anyways is it's harder to hold the father responsible, but I think there should be some social mechanism in place that would hold the father responsible for the financial cost of the children. And there's ways you can do that, I suppose, but we, I think, need to do a better job of that. One of the things that the church can do, I think, is to really promote the well-being and the health and the vitality of the family. This is an interesting one because on the political spectrum, this is nothing new among people who are on the more conservative end of the spectrum, but those who are on the left side of the spectrum tend to promote heavy spending on social programs. And there's a case to be made that that's actually effective to a point. People on the right don't want to hear that as much, but there is a case to be made that spending money on social assistance for the lowest earners actually can have positive benefits and positive social benefits. But what people on the left don't want to hear is the idea of promoting the health and well-being of the traditional family. And typically they don't want to hear that because we've tried to redefine what family is all about. We've tried to, redefine it entirely on our own terms, and it's not really working very well. But the data is really, really strong that supporting and strengthening the family as we've known it for a very long time would go a long ways towards reducing and mitigating the effects of poverty. And so the church can do that. I mean, there's different ways that church can do that. Might be providing help and sort of bringing, single mom into relationship with the church and trying to provide help and support for that mom, doing things like marriage and parenting classes. Those kinds of opportunities may be very helpful for young for families in order to maintain the health and vitality of the family. Broader community involvement as well. So the effects of a single parent home can be mitigated by extended family involvement. So in other words, if you have a mom and children without the father in the picture, for whatever reason, extended family come alongside, whether that be grandma and grandpa or uncles and aunts. All of that can actually doesn't totally make up for the absence of a father, but it really mitigates those effects. And so finding ways to encourage the broader family structure and even the broader community. So like the church, the life of the church, the church can step into that and help. And that can help sort of mitigate the effects. There's other things that we could probably suggest. Those are just a few ideas. And again, like this is one of these things where you can suggest ideas all you want, but actually implementing them is much harder. There's things like making sure that the tax code doesn't penalize married couples. In some cases it can do that. It's sort of an outdated part of the tax code, but things like that, incentivizing marriage, those kinds of things. But the point of it is really quite simple. The basic building block of a healthy, flourishing society is the family. And when the family structure breaks down, and when we try to and we do nothing about it, and we sort of turn a blind eye to it, we do that to our detriment. The data suggests very strongly that healthy families with mom, dad in the picture go a long way towards the long-term health and flourishing of the society. And that's what Paul is talking about in Ephesians chapter 6. He says, children, obey your parents, that it may go long and that you may live well in the land the Lord your God is giving you. It all comes back to that idea of flourishing in the land. What does that mean? What does it require? Healthy families, healthy, intact homes, where mom, dad are present, working together to nurture and raise their children. Hey, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time here on Speaking Of.